This week, we're turning our attention to the contextual approach to leadership, a perspective that emphasises how leadership is shaped by the environment in which it occurs. We'll be exploring how factors such as culture, organisational structure, historical moment, and external pressures all influence what leadership looks like and how it's practiced. As you engage with this week's materials, consider how context not only affects leaders' decisions, but also how followers perceive and respond to leadership. Let's get started. Before we dive into this week's topic, let's take a moment to recap what we've covered so far. In Week 1, we explored the great man and trait theories of leadership. These early approaches focused on the idea that leaders are born, not made, and that certain innate characteristics, such as confidence, intelligence, or charisma, set leaders apart from others. While these theories have been largely critiqued for their simplicity, they laid the groundwork for thinking about leadership as something rooted in personal qualities. In Week 2, we shifted our focus to the skills and behavioural approaches. These models move away from the idea of inborn traits and instead suggest that leadership can be learned and developed. The skills approach examines the technical, human, and conceptual skills leaders need, while the behavioural approach looks at what leaders actually do, how they balance task orientation with people orientation in their leadership styles. Together, these theories highlight an important evolution in leadership thinking, from who leaders are to what leaders can do. This brings us to Week 3, where we begin to explore leadership in context. We will begin by examining the context of leadership and its impact. To do this, we will focus on situational and contingency leadership theories. Let's explore one of the most widely recognised and practical leadership theories, the situational approach to leadership. This approach is most commonly associated with Hersey and Blanchard, whose work in 1977 and later in 1988 really brought this theory to the forefront. As the name suggests, situational leadership is all about the situation. The core idea is simple but powerful. Different situations require different styles of leadership. So, to be effective, a leader needs to adapt their style to fit the demands of the context, and most importantly, to the needs of their followers. Hersey and Blanchard describe two main types of leadership behaviour, directive and supportive. These should sound familiar as they're similar to the categories used in the behavioural approach we explored earlier. Let's take a quick look at both. Directive behaviours, also known as task behaviours, involve telling people what to do, giving directions, defining roles, setting deadlines. Communication here tends to be one way, from the leader to the follower. On the other hand, supportive behaviours are more focused on the relationship. These involve listening, showing empathy, and encouraging or helping team members to succeed, especially when the task or environment is challenging. This style is typically two-way and collaborative. Now, here's where the situational part comes in. Hersey and Blanchard argue that a leader must choose between these behaviours based on how ready or able the follower is to perform the task at hand. This is often assessed in terms of competence and commitment. Because follower needs aren't fixed, they evolve over time, leaders must also be flexible. They should be prepared to shift between directive and supportive behaviours as needed. This is one of the key strengths of the situational approach, its flexibility. It encourages leaders to assess each situation individually and to tailor their style to suit the people they are leading. It's also widely used in practice. Many organisations use situational leadership in their leadership development programs because it's clear, intuitive, and highly applicable to real-world challenges. So, to summarise, the situational approach tells us that there is no one-size-fits-all leadership style. Instead, effective leaders must stay responsive, evaluating their team members' needs and adapting accordingly. We'll be diving deeper into this model in our readings and discussions, so keep this flexible mindset in mind as we move forward. Let's talk about the Hersey-Blanchard model, also known as the situational leadership model. This theory suggests that no single leadership style is best. Instead of focusing purely on workplace conditions or organizational structure, the model argues that effective leadership depends on the people being led and their level of ability and readiness. In other words, successful leaders don't just stick to one way of doing things, they adapt, they're flexible, they adjust their leadership approach based on the needs of their followers and the demands of the situation. According to the model, leadership must be both task-relevant and relationship-relevant. That means leaders should first consider who they're leading, whether it's individuals or a team, and then assess the surrounding work environment. Only then can they choose the most effective way to lead in that specific context. By tailoring their leadership style this way, leaders give themselves a much better chance of helping their team succeed and achieving their goals. So remember, the Hersey-Blanchard model is all about adaptability. It's not about one-size-fits-all leadership. It's about finding the right fit for the people and the moment. Despite its practical nature and its extensive use in leadership training and development, it has been criticized for its shortcoming. The major assumption and premise of this theory is that all leaders are flexible and able to change their leadership style to fit the situation. However, most of the time it is not easy or possible for individuals to change their style. Some leaders are naturally directive and tend to find it difficult to be supportive, no matter what they do. In addition, in an organizational setting, its practicability becomes even more difficult. Should a leader adapt his or her leadership style to a group or individual? Research on group dynamics have shown that people tend to behave differently in a group. Hence, should the focus be on the group or the individual? This led to the next approach, called the contingency approach, that says, get the leader that fits the situation, rather than assume that all leaders are flexible. In response to the weaknesses found in earlier research on leadership behaviours and effectiveness, scholars began to move toward what's known as contingency theory. This shift was an effort to overcome the limitations of behavioural theories, which often failed to explain why some leadership styles worked in one context but not in another. Cogliese and Brigham, 2004. Contingency theory builds on the idea of leadership style, but with an important twist. It argues that there is no single best way to lead. Instead, effective leadership depends on the context, the contingencies of the situation. That means a leadership style that worked well in the past may not be effective today. The success of a leader isn't based on using a universally ideal style, but rather on using the right style for the specific situation. Now, this is where contingency theory differs from the situational leadership approach. Situational leadership suggests that leaders can adapt their style depending on who they're leading. In contrast, contingency theory doesn't expect leaders to change their behaviour. Instead, it focuses on matching the leader to the situation, choosing leaders whose natural style aligns with the needs of the context. So, rather than reshaping the leader to fit the role, contingency theory suggests that organisations should find the leader who already fits the environment. This model to leadership has appealed to many researchers, the most prominent of whom is Fiedler, who proposed the contingency theory in the late 1960s. Theory suggests that leadership effectiveness depends on how well the personality of the leader fits the situation or context. Fiedler proposed and developed the Least Preferred Co-worker, LPC scale, with which the personality of the leader could be measured as being relationship motivated or task motivated. Relationship motivated leaders are concerned with developing interpersonal relationship, while task motivated leaders are focused on the tasks. Leaders who score high on the scale are said to be relationship motivated, and those who score low on the scale are identified as task motivated. In addition, Fiedler suggested that situational favourableness can be characterised by leader-member relations, task structure, and position power. Leader-member relations consist of the group ambience and how the followers or employees feel about their leaders. If this is positive and the followers like and get along very well with their leaders, then the leader-member relations are defined as good. On the other hand, if the atmosphere is toxic and the followers don't respect or like their leaders, then the leader-member relations are defined as poor. For the second variable, which is the task structure, it is defined as the extent to which the requirements of a task is clear and structured. A task is said to be well structured when its requirements are clearly stated and known by the people involved, and when its completion can be clearly demonstrated. On the other hand, a task is unstructured when there are no clear rules in place to follow and difficult to verify its completion. A good example of a structured task is working as a cashier in a bank where the rules of managing accounts and the employees have been clearly communicated. While an example of an unstructured task might involve working in an organisation where you have a multifaceted role and most times no job description. You do this today and the next day you're doing something else. Most followers prefer to have structured tasks rather than unstructured task. Finally, the third variable, the position power, is the authority a leader has to reward or punish their followers. It involves the legitimacy of power based on the position they hold within the organisation. Position power is strong if Fiedler's contingency theory identifies three key variables that determine how favourable or unfavourable a leadership situation is: leader-member relations, task structure, and position power. When all three variables are strong, there's a good relationship between the leader and the group, tasks are clearly defined, and the leader has solid authority, we call that a highly favourable situation. On the other hand, when these elements are weak, poor group relations, ambiguous tasks, and little authority, the situation becomes least favourable. Now, here's where it gets interesting. According to Fiedler, leaders tend to be either task-motivated or relationship-motivated, and this is measured using the LPC score, or Least Preferred Co-worker score. Research shows that task-motivated leaders, those with a low LPC score, perform best in either highly favourable or highly unfavourable situations. In contrast, relationship-motivated leaders, those with a high LPC score, excel in moderately favourable conditions. Importantly, Fiedler doesn't expect a leader to be effective in every scenario. His theory argues that we should match the right leader to the right situation, rather than ask leaders to change who they are. A mismatch, he warns, could result in failure. Think of a leader you know. Could be from work, politics, sport, or media. Based on their behaviour, would you say they're task-motivated or relationship-motivated? Where might they fall on Fiedler's model? The contingency approach to leadership has been influential because it highlights that effective leadership depends on the situation. There is no one-size-fits-all style. However, this approach has some notable shortcomings. First, it can be overly complex and difficult to apply in real life. Leaders must assess multiple situational variables simultaneously, such as the task structure, leader-member relations, and the leader's position power. This makes quick decision-making challenging. Second, the contingency model assumes that situations and leader behaviors can be clearly defined and measured. But in reality, situations are often ambiguous and dynamic. This ambiguity limits the model's practical usefulness. Third, the approach tends to focus heavily on external factors while underemphasizing the leader's personal traits, values, and emotional intelligence, which also play crucial roles in leadership effectiveness. Lastly, contingency theory can be somewhat deterministic, implying leaders must adapt their style exactly to the situation, potentially overlooking the possibility that effective leaders can change the situation itself through vision and influence. In summary, while the contingency approach offers valuable insights about the importance of context, its complexity, limited attention to leader characteristics, and practical difficulties reduce its effectiveness as a standalone leadership model. Within this section, we begin by examining what are known as the follower approaches to leadership. While these theories still maintain a focus on the leader, they differ in that they view leadership primarily from the perspective of the follower. In other words, they ask, how do followers experience leadership? How do they respond to different styles? And what does that mean for how leadership is understood? Some of the most prominent theories in this category include transactional leadership theory, which focuses on exchanges between leader and follower. Transformational leadership theory, which emphasizes inspiring and elevating followers beyond self-interest. And leader-member exchange theory, or LMX, which examines the quality of the relationship between leader and individual followers. Each of these provides a distinct lens for interpreting leadership through the eyes of the people being led. The first theory we'll explore within the follower approaches is transactional leadership theory.
Transactional leadership is one of the more widely used leadership styles and is strongly influenced by path-goal theory, which focuses on how leaders motivate followers to achieve specific objectives. In the transactional model, motivation is based on contingent rewards. Followers are rewarded if they meet agreed-upon performance targets. This theory was introduced by Burns in 1978 and later expanded by Bass in 1985, who identified two main components, contingent rewards and management by exception. Let's break these down. Contingent rewards involve clear agreements between leader and follower. The leader outlines the expected performance, and in return, the follower receives a reward. For example, a manager may tell a sales employee, if you hit this sales target, you'll receive a bonus. The reward is tied directly to goal achievement. The second element, management by exception, has two forms, active and passive. In the active form, the leader continuously monitors performance and corrects deviations as they happen. Imagine a customer service manager who regularly observes staff and steps in immediately when standards slip. In the passive form, the leader only gets involved after problems arise. Using the same example, the manager may wait until a quarterly review to penalize poor service rather than addressing it in the moment. Together, these mechanisms define transactional leadership, structured, performance-focused, and grounded in a clear system of expectations and consequences.
Despite its practical nature and its use in enhancing organizational effectiveness, there are shortcomings to this approach. A major source of controversy surrounding transactional leadership theory is based on the use of contingent rewards to influence subordinates. As stated by Jill, 2011, page 83, while this can result in short-term achievement, it runs the risk of stifling human development, with the consequent loss of competitive advantage. The transactional leadership scholars view followers as being primarily motivated based on extrinsic needs. In today's dynamic environment, most followers are not just motivated based on contingent rewards. There are also intrinsic factors that matter. We have seen cases where employees don't seek for a higher income, but prefer to spend time with their families and so on. Transactional leadership has been described as a poor attempt at leadership in terms of moral reasoning, Felix et al., 2015. This is due to the potential scope for bribery when adopting such an approach. It further promotes a fear-based work environment, with employees only maintaining their leader's status quo through fear of punishment rather than of their own volition. Additionally, it leaves room for corruption from leaders, who can use rewards to get employees to do as they wish. Today's society is one which is morally averse to corruption and bribery. It should be noted, however, that subsequent research by scholars has shown that contingent rewards are valuable in enhancing job attitude and organisational effectiveness. Bass 1985, Gavin O'Shea et al., 2009. But although transactional leadership has been particularly effective in business settings, there still remains an argument about its usefulness in diverse settings. This led to the next approach, called the transformational leadership theory, that goes beyond contingent rewards and management by exception, but views motivation in a broader perspective. For the past 3 decades, transformational leadership has been one of the most discussed, debated, and researched areas in leadership studies. At its core, transformational leadership is about inspiring and motivating followers to rise above their own self-interests, working instead towards shared organisational goals. It's not just about directing tasks. It's about changing mindsets, encouraging innovation, and creating a vision that people genuinely want to be part of. Transformational leadership, first proposed by Burns in 1978 and later developed by Bass and Avolio in 1990, is a leadership approach focused on driving organisational change. At its heart, it involves the leader identifying the changes needed within an organisation, creating a compelling vision for that change, and then inspiring others to share and work towards that vision. Transformational leaders often demonstrate 5 key personality traits: extroversion, openness to experience, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and, though ideally minimized, levels of neuroticism. Alongside these traits, there are 4 core behaviors that define transformational leadership. 1. Idealized influence, being a role model and earning trust. 2. Inspirational motivation, communicating a clear and inspiring vision. 3. Individualized consideration, recognizing and supporting the unique needs of each follower. 4. Intellectual stimulation, encouraging creativity, problem-solving, and new ways of thinking. In short, transformational leadership is about more than just managing. It's about inspiring meaningful, lasting change. Bennis and Nanus, in 1985, identified 4 key elements that define transformational leadership. First, developing a clear vision. Transformational leaders articulate a compelling and realistic vision of the future. This vision serves as a guiding star, providing purpose and direction for the entire organisation. Second, communicating that vision. It's not enough to have a vision, it must be communicated clearly and consistently. Transformational leaders use stories, symbols, and actions to bring that vision to life, making it something people can believe in and rally behind. Third, building trust. Trust is built through consistency, integrity, and transparency. Leaders earn credibility by aligning their actions with their words and by showing genuine concern for the well-being of their team. Fourth, self-development and positive self-regard. Transformational leaders model continuous learning and self-improvement. They have confidence in their abilities, but also demonstrate humility and openness to feedback, which inspires others to grow as well. In summary, Bennis and Nanus showed us that transformational leadership isn't just about inspiring change, it's about vision, communication, trust, and personal growth. Research has shown that transformational leadership can have a positive impact on followers' performance and satisfaction. Dion et al., 2004, among others, have provided evidence of these benefits. However, like all leadership theories, transformational leadership has its conceptual weaknesses. Researchers such as Harrison, Diaz-Sens, Gill, Nordhaus, Wright, and Uckel have pointed to various limitations. One major criticism involves the Multi-Factor Leadership Questionnaire, MLQ, a widely used tool to assess transformational leadership. While many studies have confirmed its validity, Carless, 1998, argued that it measures only a single construct, rather than capturing distinct transformational leadership behaviours. Another limitation is that transformational theory tends to give most of the credit to the leader, often overlooking other important factors. It also positions transformational leadership as superior to transactional leadership, which has led to transactional leadership being undervalued. But research, such as that by Lowe and colleagues, 1996, shows that transactional leadership can be more effective in stable, predictable environments, particularly when contingent rewards are used to motivate staff. Transformational leadership also reflects elements of the old trait approach, assuming that leaders are born, not made, that only certain special individuals with charisma can be transformational leaders. This view has been widely criticised for being exclusionary and unrealistic. Then there's the question of morality. Senjaya, 2005, argued that transformational leaders may sometimes use questionable methods to persuade others to adopt their vision. If the focus is solely on achieving organisational change, leaders might be willing to sacrifice employee well-being to achieve their goals. This can inflate a leader's sense of personal power, sometimes leading to misuse or abuse of that power, as noted by Barth Farkas and colleagues, 2014. Finally, we must be aware of pseudo-transformational leadership, a variant identified by Howell and Avolio, 1992, that lacks ethical foundations. Here, leaders present themselves as transformational, but act in self-serving, manipulative ways, prioritizing their own interests over the needs of their followers. Most of the early theories on leadership focused either on the leader's traits and behaviours or on the follower and the wider context in which leadership happens. But the leader-member exchange theory, or LMX, takes a different, more psychodynamic approach. Instead of looking only at the leader or the follower, it focuses on the relationship and the interaction between them. This theory was proposed by Grayan and his colleagues in the mid-1970s, originally under the name Vertical Dyad Linkage Theory, or VDL. The basic idea is simple. Leaders form different types of relationships with each member of their team. These one-to-one relationships are called dyads. Grayan and Cashman suggested that team members fall into one of two categories, the in-group or the out-group. In-group members have a close, trust-based relationship with their leader. There's mutual respect, open communication, and influence goes both ways. Out-group members, on the other hand, have a more distant, transactional relationship. The connection is bound by formal job descriptions, with low levels of trust and obligation. And here's the interesting part. People generally make it into the in-group by going above and beyond, taking on extra tasks, showing commitment, and building rapport with their manager. The out-group members tend to do little more than the minimum required for their role, or, to put it more bluntly, they do the bare minimum. So LMX reminds us that leadership is not a one-size-fits-all process. It's shaped by the unique relationships leaders build with each individual. Before we wrap up, let's take a few minutes to pause and reflect on this week's learning. Think about the key ideas that stood out to you, the connections you've made, and how today's discussion might apply to your own practice or future work. Go ahead and jot these thoughts down wherever you keep your reflective entries, whether that's a journal, a document, or an online platform. This is your space to make sense of what you've learned and capture insights while they're still fresh.